Joyce Randolph may have played the sweet and soft-spoken Trixie Norton on The Honeymooners, but the real story behind her time on that iconic show was far from cheerful. For decades, fans knew her as the loyal neighbor and comic relief, standing alongside Jackie Gleason, Art Carney, and Audrey Meadows, in what many still consider one of the greatest sitcoms of all time. But Joyce was not just the other woman on screen, she was also the last surviving cast member. Once the cameras stopped rolling and her co-stars passed away, she finally began to share what she had been holding back for so many years. The truth was that Joyce was never fully comfortable with the spotlight, nor was she entirely welcome behind the scenes, even though The Honeymooners was supposed to be a tight-knit production. Randolph often found herself on the outside looking in. She had fewer lines, less screen time, and even less input. Some of that was by design, and some of it, according to Joyce herself, came directly from the show's biggest star, Jackie Gleason. For years, Joyce kept her head down and stayed loyal to the team, never speaking out about the power struggles or uncomfortable dynamics that shaped every episode. But as time went on, she began to open up, quietly at first, then a little more, and what she revealed stunned even the most devoted fans. Why was Joyce Randolph deliberately sidelined during her time on one of television's most beloved programs? What was it really like working under Jackie Gleason's notoriously tight control? And how did Joyce manage to protect her dignity when others seemed so eager to forget her? The answers might just change how you see The Honeymooners forever. And what she shared in her final years was perhaps the most surprising part of all. Before she ever stepped onto the set of The Honeymooners, Joyce Randolph was just another working actress in New York City, trying to find her place in the unpredictable world of live television. Born Joyce Sorolla in Detroit, she started out doing local theater and summer stock performances. By her early 30s, she wasn't an overnight star, but she had built a reputation as a reliable and charming performer. That quiet professionalism caught the attention of Jackie Gleason's team. At the time, Gleason's variety show was already a major hit, and he was assembling a recurring comedy sketch called The Honeymooners, loosely based on working-class married life in Brooklyn. The part of Trixie Norton, Ed Norton's wife, had originally been played by a different actress. But when the role opened up, Joyce Randolph's screen test immediately stood out. She had a girl-next-door sweetness that contrasted perfectly with Audrey Meadows' sharp-witted Alice. Gleason reportedly liked that she was genuine and not showbiz phony. And just like that, Joyce became part of television history. But not everyone was thrilled, not even Joyce herself. According to later interviews, she was hesitant to take the role at all. Joyce worried about being pigeonholed, especially because Trixie was not a major character. She appeared in far fewer scenes than the rest of the cast and rarely had storylines of her own. There were even times when she was cut from episodes entirely without much explanation. Joyce, who had trained seriously as an actress, quietly wondered if she had been brought in just to fill space. Behind closed doors, Joyce reportedly voiced concerns about how little her character was allowed to do and how little control she had over her own career. But walking away from a national broadcast on CBS was a terrifying prospect, especially for a woman in a male-dominated industry. So she stayed, and at least publicly, she smiled through it all. Yet even early on, there were signs that Joyce Randolph was not going to be treated as an equal. While Jackie Gleason and Art Carney dominated the screen and enjoyed creative freedom, Joyce's role was mostly ornamental. She delivered her lines with charm and grace, but there was an unspoken understanding that she was there to support, not to shine. That quiet sidelining soon became a pattern that defined not only her role on The Honeymooners, but her entire career afterward. On screen, The Honeymooners looked like a lighthearted working-class sitcom filled with laughter and lovable chaos. But according to Joyce Randolph, the real atmosphere behind the scenes was something else entirely. While millions of viewers tuned in for laughs, the set itself was anything but funny. Jackie Gleason, the show's star and creative force, ran things with an iron grip. Everyone knew he was the boss, not just in name, but in attitude. Gleason was famously resistant to rehearsals, often doing only a single run-through or in some cases none at all. He expected the cast to adapt instantly, and if mistakes happened, the blame never landed on him. He had a reputation for being brilliant but unpredictable. When you worked under him, you followed his rules, or you were out. Joyce, who came from a disciplined theater background, found this chaotic style unnerving. She once hinted that she never felt truly secure on set, never quite sure if she was doing enough or saying too much. While Audrey Meadows had a more direct and assertive relationship with Gleason, often matching his energy and earning his respect, Joyce remained more distant. Some insiders believed Gleason didn't fully trust her dramatic instincts and kept her role deliberately limited as a result, but it wasn't just Gleason's domineering presence that made the set difficult. There were whispers of icy tension between the actresses. Joyce and Audrey were never openly feuding, but they weren't exactly close either. In public, they posed together and exchanged pleasantries, but in private, there was an undercurrent of professional rivalry. Audrey was the breakout female star, praised for her sharp timing and assertive presence. Joyce, on the other hand, was often seen as the quiet tag-along, necessary to the formula, but rarely celebrated for her contribution. More than once, Joyce found herself left out of group decisions or last-minute rewrites. She wasn't consulted on character direction and was often given little notice when her scenes were cut. Even when The Honeymooners was riding high in the ratings, she remained in a strange position, famous but forgotten. Years later, she would remark that her time on set was both the highlight and the most confusing chapter of her career. She was grateful for the exposure, but constantly felt as though she was being held back. And the worst part was that no one ever told her why. But if Joyce was hoping things would improve as the show evolved, she was in for a rude awakening. Behind the scenes, The Honeymooners was completely defined by Jackie Gleason's control. He wasn't just the star, he was the mastermind, the producer, the editor, and the final word on nearly every decision. While that approach made the show feel cohesive on screen, it created a tense and often suffocating environment for the rest of the cast, especially for Joyce Randolph. Gleason's style was notoriously old school. He didn't believe in collaboration and didn't tolerate disagreement. Scripts were written with his voice in mind, and any changes were often made at the last minute, sometimes only minutes before filming in front of a live audience. For Joyce, who valued preparation and structure, that constant unpredictability was exhausting. She was expected to hit her marks, deliver her lines perfectly, and react naturally, all while never knowing if she would even appear in the next episode. She later hinted that the cast was discouraged from bonding off-screen. Gleason believed that too much familiarity between actors could ruin the on-screen chemistry, so he discouraged socializing outside of work. There were no cast dinners, no close friendships, and certainly no personal conversations unrelated to the show. For Joyce, who already felt like a secondary figure, this isolation ran deep. She often described herself as the forgotten honeymooner, and it wasn't just about her limited screen time, it reflected how she was treated once the cameras stopped rolling, even when she had something valuable to contribute, ideas about how Trixie could develop or suggestions to improve a scene's timing. Her input was usually brushed aside. Gleason made it clear that The Honeymooners was his vision, and everyone else, even Art Carney and Audrey Meadows, was replaceable. Over time, this left Joyce with little room to grow. Her character stayed static, supportive, predictable, and largely invisible. She had no monologues, no personal storylines, and no chance to step out from the shadow of Ed Norton's louder, funnier persona. Still, Joyce never publicly criticized Gleason while the show was on the air. She remained respectful, always acknowledging his brilliance, but later interviews revealed glimpses of what she truly endured. With a knowing smile, she once said, "You did not cross Jackie Gleason." Her tone was calm, but the meaning behind those words spoke volumes. What came next proved that being part of an iconic show was no guarantee of lasting success. When The Honeymooners ended its original run in 1956, most fans assumed the cast would move on to bigger opportunities. Gleason expanded his entertainment empire. Art Carney went on to win acclaim in film and theater, and Audrey Meadows remained a television favorite. But Joyce Randolph's career took a very different path, one defined more by frustration than fame. Despite her role in one of the most beloved sitcoms of all time, Hollywood wasn't calling. Casting directors saw her only as Trixie Norton, the quiet, smiling wife with little depth. In an industry that valued reinvention and range, that kind of typecasting was career poison. She auditioned for roles but was often passed over for younger actresses or those with more star power. It was a painful irony. Millions recognized her face, yet few in the business saw her potential beyond that one character. Joyce later admitted that she struggled with this invisibility. She had never expected superstardom, but she had hoped for steady, meaningful work. Instead, her career slowly faded. When acting opportunities dried up, she turned her attention to other pursuits. She focused on charity work, attended television nostalgia events, and made local appearances where she could reconnect with the fans who still remembered her warmly. Though she had been overlooked by the industry, those fans never forgot Trixie, or the woman behind her. She also dedicated time to raising her family and maintaining a quiet life far from the glare of Hollywood. But even that decision came with a bitter aftertaste, because unlike her co-stars, she was rarely invited back for television specials, anniversary tributes, or reunion appearances. In fact, Joyce was notably left out of several major Honeymooners retrospectives over the years. Whether it was an oversight or an intentional snub, the message was clear. The industry had largely forgotten her. She once said, "People thought I had disappeared, but I was always here. They just stopped looking." That lingering resentment would bubble to the surface in her later interviews. Joyce began speaking more openly about how the show's legacy had treated her as essential to the formula, but easily erased from memory. She never demanded sympathy, but the sadness in her words was unmistakable. She had played her part, followed the rules, and stayed loyal. But in the end, the industry moved on without her. Even as her acting career faded, Joyce was not finished telling her story. What she chose to reveal near the end of her life would shed new light on everything that had come before. For decades, Joyce Randolph barely spoke a word about the challenges she faced behind the scenes of The Honeymooners. She played the part of the grateful actress, the loyal team player, and the cheerful face of television nostalgia. But beneath that calm, smiling exterior was a woman who had been holding back, by choice and by necessity. Joyce was a product of her time. In the 1950s, actors, especially women, were expected to stay quiet, keep their heads down, and never speak out against their employers. To challenge someone like Jackie Gleason, who wielded enormous power both on and off screen, was considered career suicide. Joyce knew that saying the wrong thing, even in private, could lead to consequences that would be hard to reverse. So she stayed silent. She played her part, literally and figuratively, and tried not to rock the boat. As the years passed and the other cast members passed away, something began to shift. Joyce no longer had anything to lose. She was no longer worried about offending the powerful, and she began to reflect more openly on what had really happened during those formative years. In interviews during the last 2 decades of her life, Joyce's tone changed. She started acknowledging that the set was not always a friendly place, that she was often excluded from decisions, that the warmth people saw on screen was not always mirrored in real life, and that she had felt marginalized, not only by the production team, but by the entertainment industry at large. She also spoke with subtle frustration about how rarely she was invited back for reunions or tributes. While Jackie Gleason and Art Carney were celebrated as television icons, and Audrey Meadows was remembered fondly in countless retrospectives, Joyce's contributions were often overlooked. She was the 4th member of the core cast, yet somehow she kept getting written out of the story. That realization hurt, and she admitted it. Still, Joyce never lashed out or blamed anyone directly. Instead, she framed her silence as an act of grace. There was no point in complaining. She once said, "People wanted to remember the show a certain way, and I did not want to ruin that." It was a sentiment filled with both wisdom and heartbreak. But now that the spotlight had shifted and the stakes were lower, Joyce allowed herself to say what she had always known, that her experience was far more complicated than anyone had ever guessed. In her final years, she finally had the chance to leave fans with the version of the truth she had never dared to share before. In her later years, Joyce Randolph lived a quiet, dignified life, far from the fame that once surrounded her. While the rest of the Honeymooners cast faded into memory, Joyce remained quietly watching as the world moved on. She lived in the same modest Manhattan apartment for decades, valuing stability and simplicity over the spotlight. And though she made fewer public appearances, she never lost her connection to the people who remembered her best, her fans. Joyce was never bitter in the traditional sense. She still spoke kindly about the show and about how grateful she was for the love that came her way from generations of viewers. But the warmth in her voice often carried a weight, one that hinted at all the things she had endured in silence. She knew she had become something of a symbol, not just of a bygone era of television, but of forgotten contributions, and she embraced that role with quiet pride. In interviews conducted well into her 80s and 90s, she shared memories with startling clarity. She recalled the long hours, the backstage nerves, and the pressure to perform perfectly on the first try because there was no going back. She laughed about the quirks of live television, but she also spoke more candidly about how it felt to be left out of the bigger narrative. "People always ask about Jackie or Art," she once said, "but no one ever really asked about me." Her message to fans, especially in her final years, was one of gentle honesty. She wanted people to know that while the Honeymooners brought her a certain level of fame, it also came with real sacrifices. She lost out on roles, she was often underestimated, and she had to watch as others were celebrated while she was largely forgotten. But despite all that, she never lost her sense of humor or her sense of grace. Joyce made it clear that she did not regret being part of the show. In fact, she still referred to it as a gift, but one that came wrapped in layers of silence, compromise, and unrealized dreams. When she appeared at fan events or television panels, she was often met with standing ovations, not just for her work as Trixie, but for enduring with dignity and finally telling the truth on her own terms. In a quiet but powerful way, Joyce reclaimed her place in television history. She may not have had the loudest voice during the show's original run, but by the end of her life, she had said what needed to be said, and it left a deeper mark than anyone could have expected. Joyce Randolph may never have had the screen time or star power of her fellow Honeymooners, but her story is no less important, and perhaps even more powerful. She was the quiet constant, the one who showed up, delivered her lines, and held her head high while the spotlight danced elsewhere. For years, she was cast in the shadows of Gleason's booming laugh and Carney's physical comedy. But when all the noise faded, it was Joyce who remained. Her legacy is not just about being the last surviving cast member. It's a story about endurance, about grace under pressure, and about staying true to yourself when the world is ready to write you off. Joyce Randolph didn't have a dramatic exit or a headline-grabbing scandal. Instead, she had something far more lasting: the courage to speak quietly but truthfully about the reality behind the fantasy. She reminded us that even during television's golden age, not every story was as simple as it appeared. Behind the laughter were politics, power struggles, and deep personal disappointments. And sometimes the people who smiled the brightest were the ones carrying the heaviest burdens. In her later years, Joyce's honesty helped fans see The Honeymooners through a new lens, not just as a beloved classic, but as a complicated workplace where not everyone had a voice. She gave recognition to those overlooked, becoming something greater than a supporting actress. She became a quiet truth-teller in an industry that rarely rewards such bravery. Her passing marked the end of an era, but her words still resonate. With time and reflection, the world has begun to understand what Joyce Randolph always deserved: respect, recognition, and remembrance, not only as Trixie Norton, but as the woman who saw everything and, at last, chose to tell her story. Because sometimes the most powerful revelations don't come from the loudest voices, but from the ones we almost forgot were there all along.